Hey y'all, it's Kate from the Apothecary and welcome back to my channel. I'm here today to talk about The Lotus Eaters by Tatjana Soli. This is a historical fiction book with some romance in there. Why I read this one? Well, first I started reading it because it was listed in my Audible library expiring at the end of 2024, and I thought I can squeeze in this audiobook by the end of the year. Well, turns out I couldn't squeeze in the whole audiobook by the end of the year, and it disappeared from my Audible list. However, I was so interested and engaged with this story that I went and got a copy from my library and finished the rest of the book. My general thoughts is that, yes, this is a slow book. This was a slow read, slow prose, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. In this case, it was entirely intentional, I feel like, by the author. Soli's prose forced me to slow down my reading pace and take everything in and reflect on everything that I was reading. Quick spoiler-free summary of what this book is about. This is the story of Helen Adams, who's an American photographer covering the Vietnam War. As she captures the chaos of the conflict on film, breaks into the man's world of war photojournalism, and finds herself torn between the love of two men. Let me jump right into my review here. Even though most of these characters were entirely fictional or a mashup of a couple different real-life people, they all felt very realistic and sympathetic to me. Soli put a human face on the quote enemies and made them not so much enemies but just real people in life, and especially when dealing with a war story, especially with something like Vietnam, where especially in America it has been extremely enemized. I don't even know if that's a word, I might have just made that up, but a lot of the talk around Vietnam, especially the Vietnam War era, was all negative in terms of the Vietnamese, that they were all the enemy, and it turns out they're not all the enemy. Just like in just about every war that has ever happened, every conflict that has ever happened, there was good and there was bad on both sides, and Soli takes that good and really exemplifies it in her book. In our atmosphere and setting, now to me, and maybe this is because I was born after the Vietnam War, and so the narrative around Vietnam has been very constructed. But to me, Vietnam has always held this precarious place in my head where it's both an extremely dangerous place, but also exotic and beautiful and almost romantic. Soli makes Vietnam feel just like that in The Lotus Eaters. Her writing style was so engrossing, I had to continue after my Audible copy left. I couldn't stop thinking about this book, and although the pace is slow, it feels purposeful. It fits the story and the setting and really just makes you slow down and examine what you're reading and appreciate the beauty in this story. Our plot, now admittedly the plot felt like it was third to our characters and our setting here, but as I always say, that's not a bad thing. Sometimes stories are more focused on the characters and the setting and less on the actual plot. You know, the plot was there, but it felt like it was more in the background and less developed than some other aspects of this story. Intrigue, you know, I had intrigue throughout this whole book. I had to know what happened to all of these characters, and that's why I continued reading it after my Audible copy left my library, and that's also why I continued reading it throughout till the end, because I just had to know. Logic, to me, everything made so much sense that it hurt sometimes. You knew exactly why the characters made the choices that they did, because it all made so much logical sense that it hurt my heart reading sometimes. An enjoyment. This is a book that you don't necessarily enjoy reading, but it blew me away when I read it. When I finished it, I just sat there and thought about it for a long time, and it just has sat with me ever since. Our audiobook, now, like I said, I only listened to a little bit before it left my Audible library, but what I did hear had me hooked the entire time. I wanted to keep listening. And I'm going to throw in spice here because there was some spice, more than I thought I would get, but it was probably a 3 out of 5 spice. The open door level, where it's on the page, but it's minimal and it's not very explicit. It's more romantic spice. So that is my quick review for the Lotus Eaters by Tatjana Soli. If you are looking for a heart-rending historical fiction tale about the Vietnam War that is told from essentially both sides of the story, you get the Vietnamese story and you get the American story, highly recommend The Lotus Eaters by Tatjana Soli. If you've read this book before, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. As always, keep reading, and I love you all to the moon and back.